There's a big problem with Soul Eater. Everyone wants an anime remake after Fire Force, but there's a serious question of who would actually make it. Because if you're a Fire Force fan, then you probably want the same studio, which would be David Productions. But if you're a fan of the original Soul Eater anime, then you probably want Studio Bones to remake it since they're the ones who made it, and that anime is notorious for its incredible animation and soundtrack. So the problem is, everyone wants the Soul Eater remake, but nobody knows who would or even who should do it. That's why in this video, I'm going to talk about the significance of Fire Force ending, present both arguments for who should animate Soul Eater, and explain who I think will be the most likely studio. So first off, let's talk about why people think we're getting a Soul Eater remake. In recent years, everyone thought it would just be nice to have a remake, but once Fire Force's manga ended, everyone realized a remake only makes sense. So to start things off, we need to talk about Fire Force. I'm sure if you're a Fire Force fan, then even if you never saw Soul Eater, you've heard everyone talking about the connection. I'm not going to spell it out just because it's one of those things where part of the beauty is in the first experience. But at the very least, I can say that the worlds of Soul Eater and Fire Force do share a small connection. So because of that connection, fans of both series feel that the final episode of Fire Force would be the perfect time to tee up a Soul Eater remake. There's also a couple of other reasons, namely the fact that the ending feels slightly rushed, and also the fact that the anime caught up to the manga and Bones made their own ending, meaning the end of Soul Eater has never actually been animated. So for all of those reasons, it only makes sense that they would remake the Soul Eater anime. And for the reasons I won't spoil you on, the end of Fire Force will be the absolute perfect time to announce that remake. But then we hit an interesting problem. Because usually if an anime gets a sequel, that sequel goes to the same studio. Not always, but usually. Except, Soul Eater isn't exactly a sequel to Fire Force. Dave Pro made Fire Force, so there's a chance that they would also make Soul Eater. But Studio Bones made the original Soul Eater anime, so there's also a chance that they could do the remake. Both of them are great studios, and there's good reason to believe either of them would be given the project, which is where we run into the problem of which of these studios would actually make the new anime. Now, oftentimes when we talk about new anime, people like to share who they think should make that anime. And I have a few reasons why both of these studios deserve to remake Soul Eater that I want to share later in the video. But first, I think it's better that we start by setting some realistic expectations by asking who would make the new Soul Eater. And based on another anime that was already announced, I think we might have our answer. Actually, before I get into that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. But, like I was saying, Studio Bones has already come out and announced that they're working on another new anime, Gachi Akuta. Funny enough, this series is widely regarded as the spiritual successor of Fire Force, mainly because the creator, Kei Urano, was an assistant to Ohkubo, but also because the series is so similar in visuals and writing style. So you could argue that Studio Bones could also work on a new Soul Eater anime because they would be able to alternate between remaking Soul Eater and making the spiritual successor to Fire Force. In other words, they could release Gachi Akuta one season, say in the winter, and then they could release Soul Eater in the fall of the same year. But there's just one problem, namely timing. So Gachi Akuta has already been announced, and the Soul Eater remake has not. Then, logically speaking, if they are working on both, then Gachi Akuta has to come out before Soul Eater. But here's the problem. Bones has already said that Gachi Akuta is scheduled for 2025. Considering we're already in the winter season, my guess is that it won't debut until at least the summer. Now, Fire Force is supposed to come out this April, with the final core of Season 3 releasing in January of 2026. So hypothetically speaking, let's look at the timeline. We know Fire Force starts in April, and then starts the second core in January. So that means the finale of Fire Force would probably take place sometime in late March or early April. And if Soul Eater gets announced, it would happen at the same time. So logistically speaking, it's possible to imagine a timeline where Gachi Akuta and Fire Fire Force fit into each other. We know Gachi Akuta is starting this year, and we know that Fire Force is ending spring of next year. So when you look at it, it seems like these two timelines could line up, because if Gachi Akuta starts this summer, if it's one core, then it would end in the fall between Season 3 of Fire Force. And if it's two cores, then it would either end when the second core of Fire Force starts in January, or they could space it out like they're doing with a lot of anime now and start it right after Fire Force ends. Granted, that's assuming all of those dates play out exactly like I just explained, assuming Gachi Akuta does get two cores, and assuming that they would space them out. I think time-wise, it's possible to imagine Bones timing Gachi Akuta around Fire Force so that when Fire Force ends, they could start to alternate between Soul Eater and Gachi Akuta. But even if it makes sense logistically, there's two reasons why I don't see Bones taking on this project. First of all, they're already working on Gachi Akuta, which again is the spiritual successor to Fire Force, and Fire Force is Ohkubo's other manga. So implicitly what they're doing is saying that they've moved on to new projects. This isn't to say that they could never work on Soul Eater again, but especially when they're still working on My Hero, and now they have the new Vigilantes anime coming out this April, I just don't see them having room to take on another big series and still have room to take on other new projects. The last reason I don't think Bones is working on a potential Soul Eater remake is pretty simple. You know how I just said Bones is working on Vigilantes, the My Hero spin-off? Well, anyone could have predicted that since Bones has been working on My Hero forever. For that same reason, I don't see Dave Pro working on Fire Force, finishing the series, and then coming out like, okay, and now to announce the new Soul Eater series, some other guys. It just makes more sense that Dave Pro would be the ones to work on Soul Eater, since they're the ones that have been making Fire Force for what will be 5 years. So in terms of who would work on the Soul Eater remake, Dave Pro seems like the pretty likely candidate. Time-wise, it does make sense for Bones to work on Soul Eater, but rationally speaking, it just makes more sense for Dave Pro to work on Soul Eater since they're the ones who made Fire Force. But, like I said before, even if the odds are in Dave Pro's favor, we still don't know for sure. And obviously everyone still has their theories. So until we know for sure, the question on all of our minds is going to be who should animate Soul Eater. And I actually have an argument for both studios. My argument for Dave Pro is plain and simple. Dave Pro worked on Fire Force for all of these years, and Bones already got the chance to work on Soul Eater. So it's only fair that Dave Pro should get the Soul Eater anime since they're the ones who made Fire Force, especially considering Bones is already working on Gachi Akuta. Now, I will admit that I am biased towards Dave Pro since I generally like their anime more than the anime from Bones, but I also think there's a strong case to be made for Bones as well. On the one hand, Bones already had their chance, but at the same time, that's all the more reason to give them the remake. They made the original anime that everyone loves. They know the characters and know what works and what doesn't. So giving them the new anime would not only pay respect to old fans, but it would also give Bones a second chance to animate Soul Eater, which would fall into the whole idea of reanimating Soul Eater and giving it a proper ending in the first place. Plus, Bones is working on Gachi Akuta, so there's just something nice about thinking the spiritual successor of Fire Force and the series linked to Fire Force would be animated by the same studio. Now, those are the simpler reasons as far as who should get Soul Eater. Beyond that, we have to get into the technical discussions of like who is the bigger studio, who is more talented, who puts out the better projects. And while I could do that, I think any discussion in that area is naturally going to be subjective to the point of not being super constructive. That being said, if you put a gun to my head and said, alright Ouji, pick one, I do have one thing to say. Now again, I already said that I'm biased, but even considering that, one thing that I think Dave Pro has over Bones is consistency. Bones is not the same studio they were almost 30 years ago. Look at what they put out now. My Hero is a great anime, but it's notorious for its inconsistency. It's got plenty of peaks, but just as many lows. I've heard great things about some of their other anime like Metallic Rouge, and I think Mob Psycho 100 is a masterpiece. But when you look at My Hero, their flagship series for almost 10 years, It's been consistently inconsistent. Granted, it has improved over its last few seasons, but the basic issues are still there. So in terms of who should get Soul Eater, I'd rather it go to Dave Pro. I love the Fire Force anime. It looks gorgeous, and it's a great example of how Dave Pro stands out in sound design. I love the original Soul Eater, and I love Studio Bones, but if we're gonna do Soul Eater again, I don't want to see it reanimated just for it to come out and look less good than the original. Now, like I said, realistically this anime could go to either studio, but right now we don't know for sure. In the meantime, everyone has their favorite, and if you ask me, I think it should go to the studio that will end up animating what will likely be one of the best final seasons of all time. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What are your predictions for a Soul Eater remake? Which of these studios would you prefer? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like to pick which anime I talk about next, then make sure to become a Shonen OG YouTube member. Channel members have access to exclusive offers like custom emojis, custom loyalty badges, and you'll get your name in the credits of each video. Also, make sure to check out my other Soul Eater videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.